at the event, we are in line meeting the bride and the bridesmaids and so forth. And I said, "You look very beautiful today." That's my first words to Anne. And I met her in 1966 at this wedding. I dated 3 women that I met, including Anne, afterwards, and I liked Anne by a process of elimination most of all.
When did you get married?
I got married in 1970, the year I got my PhD in English, and I got my first full-time job at Fordham University in the Bronx, New York. And that was in 1970 to 1972. And Anne remained my wife for the rest of her life. Unfortunately, it was wonderful. I have 3 wonderful children: Jonathan, my oldest; Jeffrey, my second boy; and Jessica, my youngest. And they've been wonderful to me throughout my life, that kind of thing. And it was a very happy marriage, take the pleasure of saying to you. And on a professor's salary, I couldn't have it any other way except to make the best of a wonderful relationship with Anne Curley. She was a stellar nurse, an emergency room nurse, almost all the time. Yes, not almost all the time I was married to her. We were a team because, like many modern couples, I didn't make enough money myself to sustain the marriage on my income alone. So Anne and I had to work and share, and it was a mutually wonderful marriage. She wasn't in the background. She was part of everything.
Tom, I have a few more questions about how you and Anne met and subsequently got married. But first, returning to Harvard for a moment, what did it cost you to go to Harvard?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I got a free education because I won a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship, which funded my first year totally. And so therefore I'm a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. And then Kirkland House took me in. The master gave me a room at Kirkland House, one of the many houses on the campus at Harvard University. And I would I was also given a small stipend of money for teaching undergraduates at Harvard. These, at that time, men and women were both amalgamated in classes. They weren't separated between Harvard and Radcliffe. They were all one body of students. And I started teaching in 1967, as I mentioned to you, Dave, and I taught all the time I was there. And what you would do, Harvard University is a great place to go, particularly if you're going for a graduate. It's graduate degree oriented, not undergraduate. I think Bridgewater State University is a wonderful university, and it's oriented for undergraduates, not graduate students. But it's just the opposite at Harvard, where the graduate student body is very, very large, and people are going for master's and doctoral degrees, that kind of thing there. And one of the aspects of being a professor at Harvard is that you only taught large classes if you were a professor, and you never interacted with the undergraduates who are in your audience. It would be the graduate students underneath the Harvard professor that would meet the undergraduates. They divide up the classes into small groups, say 10, and you would meet the graduate student would meet the undergraduates to take questions and answers and concerns about their health, happiness, and what have you. But the professor was like a god. You came in, you gave your lecture, and you did not talk to the students while you were lecturing. You did not take hands or anything like that. So that's what I would do. I'd meet the students once a week and go over what they had learned and talk about some new aspect of what the professor was talking about. Let's say it was a course in Milton, Paradise Lost. I would talk about what has just been said by the professor, and then I'd mention a few other aspects about Paradise Lost for the class. And by the time I graduated in my senior year, the year I had to finish my doctoral dissertation, and by the way, it took about 3 years to write the doctoral dissertation. You stop going to classes. When you go to graduate school, when I was there at Harvard, you try to round out. You take a major test in all aspects of American and English literature from the time of the ancient times, and you'd find out where your gaps were. You'd have to pass, if you passed the exam, the exam covering all aspects of literature in England and America. If you passed, you got your master's degree, but you also learned what your weaknesses were. I had a weakness in Victorian literature, so I would take classes, didn't have to pay for them, but I would attend, like an undergraduate, a whole year's worth of courses in Victorian, so that when I reached my final year, and it took me 5 years to get my doctorate from 1965 to 1970, what happens, you have to have your doctoral dissertation approved by your mentor, the professor you're working under, and then it has to be approved by 2 or 3 more professors in the English department. You have to pass 3 language exams, 2 modern and 1 ancient, so I had to pass some Latin, German, and French. If you don't pass those language exams, you cannot get your doctorate. And I knew some graduate students that were old men and women trying to get their doctorate, and they couldn't pass the language exam. Isn't that awful? Then on top of that, when you get approval of your doctoral dissertation, you pass your languages, then you have to meet 3 professors who have the right to ask you over a 2-hour oral exam anything in American English literature going back to the time of Christ. If you don't pass that, you only have 2 chances. And I remember one true story. It didn't happen to me. A young nun who was doing a doctoral dissertation on Shakespeare, she froze in the oral examination. She couldn't, can you tell me what you're writing about in your doctoral dissertation, sister? She couldn't speak. This is a true story. So the professor who was her mentor was kind enough to say, "Can you tell me, when was Shakespeare born?" She couldn't. "When did he die?" She couldn't answer. And he said, "Sister, can you say the Hail Mary?" She did, and she passed.
She passed.
She got out of the coldness of her mind,
Yes.
and she passed. It shows you the stakes. You know, you spend years and years and years, and anything can go wrong.
Right at the very end.
Yeah, I was able to, you wanted to ask me about Anne, and it was during that time that I'm discussing my academic life that I met Anne. Because it's so intensive to get a doctorate, and because I was single and poor, I dated many girls because I didn't want to get serious with anybody, fall in love and get married before my time.
Yep.
So I dated, and one time, one of my friends introduced me to a bride-to-be who was going to get married soon, and she said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, I came with my friend, and he has a wedding present to give you for your wedding." He wasn't going to go to the wedding, and she said, "Will you come to my wedding?" She says, "I don't have enough men there. There are too many girls, and I would like you to dance with some of the girls, and would you take pictures, candid pictures of the people?" And I said, "I'd be glad to do that." I never looked a gift horse and rejected it, so, in the mouth, without accepting it. So I met Anne. She was one of the bridesmaids, and as they were lining up after the wedding, I met Anne, and I said, "You look very beautiful today." My first words to her. And after that, I dated her. I dated two other girls that I had met at the wedding. And I liked Anne most of all. It was a wonderful marriage. We had 3 children, Jonathan, Jeffrey, and Jessica, my youngest. And they've been wonderful people to me. It was a wonderful marriage, and I'm glad to be able to tell you that, because on a professor's salary, you couldn't afford to get divorced.
Yeah, because she was an emergency room nurse, so...
Yeah, and she was a nurse. She was an excellent, stellar emergency room nurse, mainly at the Brockton Hospital, though she did work at a few other places. That was her life's work, and she was very good at it. She unfortunately passed away at the age of 64, very young, and of lung cancer, and never had smoked cigarettes in her life. And she passed away, and now 14 years has gone by, and I've been a widower all that time. But when I tell you that my children have been wonderful, that's